Okay, so we're going to start in First Peter chapter 2. So this subject is a pretty big subject. Um, I've titled it Priesthood of the Believer. And, uh, and just like when we were studying the Kings, the reason it's important is, um, the scriptures in like Revelation and different, it calls us kings and priests forever. So it's important to know how to be kings, but also how to be priests as well. So you can't just know one or the other. You need to know both because they interact. Just like when we were talking about the kings, remember how they interact. Like especially with Hezekiah, how the priesthood interacted with the kings. The kings interacted with the priests. If you and basically the king has the authority, but the priesthood has they facilitate everything. So why should we care about this subject? As believers, most people when they hear priesthood, they hear Catholic, or they hear somebody wearing a collar, or confessional, or whatever pops in your head. What pops in your head when you hear priest?
Catholic priest.
Catholic priest, right? And I actually, it's amazing to me when I talk about priesthood of a believer. There's some believers that get offended, and they're thinking that I'm trying to create some hierarchy of like authority, like I'm trying to lord over somebody or tell somebody what to do, when that's not the case either. So if at any point you feel like, well, that sounds like you're trying to control people, or you're trying to, create some sort of new system, you know, that's not what I'm trying to do. But when you understand what it means to be a king, which is you get to make this whatever you want it to be, and the priest is job is to bring people into right relationship with the Father. All right. So what this does is, if you understand how these two things interact and how you act as a priest, then it brings focus, it brings rest, and actually brings a high grade of success as a believer. Um, the picture uh, is the picture of the priesthood is one of Jesus' sacrifice. Clearly, the sacrifices clearly map out what Jesus did on the cross, 100%. But it's just not limited to that, because see, Christ is our high priest. That we get this idea that Jesus is the one making all the sacrifices. But if you go back and look at the hierarchy, that's not how it was at all. You had the high priest, and then you had the regular priest, which was everybody else. But the high priest didn't do the daily sacrifices. He only did one the whole year, one. You know which one that was? How about you, Denise? You know which one that was?
Not really. I could guess, but it would be a guess.
Oh, that's fine. It was the Day of Atonement.
I don't know if I know how to turn this off or not, but I know it's the door.
Okay. All right. We're trying to turn the radio off. But what it is the priesthood in the Old Testament is a shadow of Jesus, but it's also a shadow of us, because we're called priests, and which brings a pretty interesting idea is, how do you cast a shadow? How is a shadow cast? It's cast by something of substance getting in the way of light, and it's causing a dark patch where where the light would travel had it not been interrupted. So we as believers cast shadows backwards into the Old Testament, which is interesting, isn't it? So which comes first, So it gives me this idea that maybe God had this in mind when he gave the priesthood. So I told everybody to read 1 Peter, but go back to Exodus chapter 19, verse 4 through 6. And it has the very first mention of this idea. So they're in the desert, and verse 5 of chapter 19, it says, "Now therefore, if you obey my voice indeed and keep my commandments, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel." So that mirrors the verse of 1 Peter 2:9. And I'll read 1 Peter 2:9. "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people called for God's own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." So that's a mirror of what Exodus is saying. So some people would say, well, the priesthood is an Old Testament idea, not a New Testament idea. Well, Peter clearly connects the two. So it's very clear that so if it's in the Old Testament and it's punctuated in the New Testament, then we should pay attention to it, right? But if you go back up a couple verses in 1 Peter chapter 2, we're still struggling with the music. Yeah, I know. If you look at starting verse 4, it says, "And come to him," and I'm jumping in the middle, I know.
Are we, okay, wait a minute.
1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4.
Chapter 2, verse 4. Okay.
It says, "And come to him as to a living stone, rejected by men, but choice and precious in the sight of God. You also, as living stones," so the living stone he was talking about originally was Jesus, but it says, "You also are living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." So what's the spiritual house he's talking about?
Our
What's that? I heard Denise say something.
To do.
Yeah. So the spiritual house that he's talking about there is the tabernacle or the temple, right? If you've ever done a study on the temple or the tabernacle, you can see we could talk a ton about the tabernacle or the temple. Thank you, Helen. So, have you ever studied the tabernacle or the temple? I know you have.
No.
Yeah. Okay. No.
Oh, have I ever studied it? I thought you said stayed at it.
No, studied it. Well, you have
yeah.
stayed in it. You just and I'll get to that. But what's interesting about the tabernacle and the temple is that the tabernacle is a multi-layered picture. Okay, if you go into Revelation and you talk about what John saw. Remember what he saw? He saw an altar, and he said there was the souls of the martyrs. Right. Remember?
Yeah.
Then he saw a sea of glass. Then he saw the throne. Right?
Right.
Heaven is laid out like the tabernacle. So if you understand the tabernacle, you understand heaven.
Okay.
Because this is where God chose to reside. Okay?
Right.
And I think I mentioned it once before in another Bible study, but for God to go to heaven was a reduction. Because before he created the heavens and the earth, there was no place. So he inhabited eternity, which means he had to reduce himself to go there. All right? It's a big, that's a
huge idea.
That's a huge idea.
Yep.
Okay, so this is a picture of Jesus as well, right? but it's also a picture of us. So, but it's also us, but it's a place where we operate. You know, where do you operate every day? In your tabernacle, right? And your tabernacle is what roams around with you. It's this. So everybody in them has an altar. Everybody in them has a laver. Everybody in them has a holy place. Everybody in them has a holy of holies. In other words, you're going to worship something. Whatever that is, you're going to worship it. So the question is, are you? And just like with the king Hezekiah, his dad before him, remember, he got rid of the altar and put in a false one, which a lot of people do. They put in a false altar in their lives, right? So we have to look at the origins of where all this comes from. So just like he says, you're a spiritual, a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices. So these aren't physical sacrifices he's talking about. He's saying, basically, Peter, you know, and I believe Peter wrote this, the Apostle Peter, so I'm going to go with that. So he got this, where did he get these ideas from? Well, more than likely got them from Jesus himself. Or even if it wasn't written by Peter, it was written from the perspective of Peter, therefore it's still coming from Jesus himself. So however you want to spin it. So what are the qualifications of a priest? Well, if you go back and look, and I'm not going to torture you guys with going back and looking at all the scriptures, but I'll just hit you with the big qualities. First, you had to be born into the family. Aaron was designated the high priest. And only his sons or his descendants could be priests. Aaron. Yeah. Moses' brother. All right. So you have Aaron and his sons being the only ones allowed. And remember we talked about Korah a little bit, I think at one point, where Korah didn't like that. And he said, hey, I want to be priest as well. And God took it personal and the ground swallowed him up, right? So as believers, the only people that can be priests in God's economy is people that are born again, that are born into the family. So you have to be a believer. So there's qualification, right? Second is they had to have no physical defect. So they couldn't have any kind of obvious defect. Couldn't have a cleft palate, couldn't have clubbed foot, couldn't have a withered hand, or they couldn't have any kind of physical birth defect. What's that a picture of for us as believers? Yeah, so the blood of Christ does what to us? It makes us perfect. And whether we are or not, that's the rub, isn't it? Whether we are or not, from God's perspective, he deems us worthy. He deems us perfect. He deems us as Jesus because that's what he's looking for. That's what he sees, right? No contamination. They had to be, so that no birth defect, no physical defect, and they had to have no contamination. In other words, they had to be ceremonially clean. Remember in Hezekiah, remember I talked about the 4 cleansings of the priest. The first cleansing, they didn't cleanse themselves enough, and then they did it again, and the third time, and finally the 4th time, they finished the job and got everybody ready for service. Well, that's the same thing for us. You know, now the question is, and here's the big debate, and I don't care where you land on it, but do we have to keep ourselves from sin, or is it that God sees us as not contaminated? Just like he doesn't see us as any kind of defect.
Are you saying like repentance? What are you saying?
Yeah. Being clean before God, you know. I know I can't be clean before God without God's help, so to me it's I got nothing to bring to this game, you know. Like a lot of people are proud of their, some people might be proud of their discipline, of being disciplined in not sinning. You know what I'm saying? Some people are prideful about not sinning.
As soon as you get into pride, there you go.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. It's
Isn't that why?
that's what I'm saying. I don't really bring a lot to the table
And that's why,
to keep my.
you know,
Like, there's some people of the opinion that once Jesus saves you, then it's up to you to keep yourself clean. Good luck. Good luck with that. Yeah, you can't even do that.
That's what we
No.
Yeah.
need.
So, had to be born into it, no physical defect, no contamination, had to be available. In other words, you can't do the job, just like they won't pay you until you actually show up, right, to your job. Same thing here. You have to be available. So there's a lot of priests that they're born in the family, they have no physical defect, they have no contamination, but they're not available. In other words, they don't want to do the job, or for whatever reason, they're not there to do the job. So that's the fourth qualification characteristic. The last one is they have to be trained. So this is the one that's what this is about. This is part of a training. And just like the training of the regular priests, we have to be trained as believers in how to do the job. And you can't do the job unless you've been trained. But training alone isn't, just like doing Bible study alone just will not make you the believer you need to be. You need to take that information and let it spur you into action. That's, and part of the training, and it's actually in Leviticus, where there's a training time where the new priests practice doing the offerings. So and plus it's kind of like an apprenticeship. They would come alongside and learn with other priests that have more experience. So that's kind of what this is too. So those are the 5 qualifications, whatever you want to say. Born into family, no physical defect, no contamination, availability, and training. Now, you can find, if you really want I probably should have the scripture verses, but I just don't have them at my fingertips right now. But if you really want them, I'll find them. But we have all these things found in Christ. So all those things, actually, the first 3 we have found in Christ. The last 2 are up to us, whether or not we're going to be available and whether or not we're going to be trained. And I will tell you, the training part is going to be hard because we as believers in America have such a disconnection from animal sacrifice. Now there's some cultures like in New Guinea, they do animal sacrifices, well they used to, I don't know if they still do, but they used to do animal sacrifices all the time. So they connect to this very, very, very quickly. So the question is that spiritual priesthood that Peter's talking about, is it still existent today? And the answer is yes, it is. One of the most famous verses that we quote all the time, and you've heard it, I know you've heard it, as soon as I start saying it, you're going to be able to finish it. I beseech you therefore, brother, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto the Lord, which is your reasonable service. Have you heard that? How many times have you
Yes.
heard that?
A lot.
A lot. Well, think about that for a second. You present your body as a living sacrifice. Present it to who? Well, in the tabernacle, God didn't perform the sacrifices. Neither did the high priest. So if you say you're presenting your body to Jesus, he's our high priest. The high priest never did that. So who you present yourself to?
To the brothers and sisters
Yes.
around.
To the spiritual priesthood. So let me ask you a question. Do you want a spiritual priesthood that knows what they're doing or don't have a clue?
Well, hopefully that's what they're doing.
Well, how well are we doing with that? How well are we doing with ministering to one another?
Not good.
It means we're not trained. See, how we minister to one another is contained in the sacrifices. So, to understand the sacrifice and how they operate, what your role is in that is to give you confidence in dealing with, giving us confidence with dealing with one another. Does that sound interesting? It's highly useful. I said this one time, and I had a group of people go, "What?" But I have used the sacrifices in my life probably for the last 15 years. Use them, not just thought about them, but use them. And they're very, very functional and very, very useful. So, how does that hit you, Denise? A loser?
I boil that down and
I think your audio's a little bit weak. But basically, I'm sorry, Denise, if you're talking. But basically, we take the physical aspect of the sacrifices in the tabernacle and we spiritualize them. Okay? We look at them not as a physical thing that you do. And do you know there's some people today that actually do animal sacrifices? They do. They sacrifice lambs and goats and pigeons and all that. And it's, yeah, I was surprised as well. So, okay, so I've given you a couple of verses, but this one I'm going to give you is pretty daggum clear. If you go to Romans 15:16, and what I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to establish a New Testament basis for why we should care. So if you go to Romans 15, verse 16, this is the verse that clicked it over for me and started me down a new journey, taking the information of the tabernacle, the priesthood. It's okay. I told them earlier, as many struggles that we're having getting this out means it's really important. So,
We have them all there.
Yes.
The living sacrifice.
Yes.
Reference.
Romans 12:1 and 2 is the living sacrifice. Okay? And then Romans 15:16, this is Paul talking to the Romans. If you go back into verse 15, he says, "But I have written very boldly to you on some points, so as to remind you again, because of the grace that was given me from God, to be a minister of Christ Jesus, to the Gentiles, ministering." Now that word ministering is that Greek word is the only time that word is used in the New Testament. And what it literally means is to be an attendant in the temple at the altar. That's what it means. So he's saying, I am standing as a priest ministering in the temple, ministering as a priest of the gospel of God, that my offering of the Gentiles might be acceptable, sanctified by the Holy Spirit. So now he's pictured himself at the altar as if he were taking the Gentiles and sacrificing them as animals. Now, have you ever heard that?
no.
What does
No.
that invoke in your mind?
It's not a good picture.
Well, it sounds violent, doesn't it?
It does.
It does. But what he's saying is that we all as believers should do what? Die. Physically or spiritually. That's what Paul said, and Paul is one of the famous ones. He says, I die daily. Right? Remember that? So what's he talking about? He's talking about, spiritually speaking, becoming the sacrifice. That Jesus, just like Jesus was a sacrifice, we are identified in Jesus. That's what Romans 6 is about, being identified with him. We are identified in the cross, we're identified in the death, we're identified in the resurrection. Right? So in the sacrifices, we are identified, just like Jesus was when he lived. So now Paul, but what the interesting part is, he's connecting all that together, and he's saying, I need to be a trained priest so that I can offer my brothers and sisters as a sacrifice to God. Now how does that all work? You see what I mean? We need to really research this. Now, like again, is this another way of control or dominance? No. Because there's only two offices in the priesthood. The high priest and then everybody else. So I am on the same level of playing as you or Denise or anybody else. So I'm not higher than anyone else. I may be more experienced, which means I should be more diligent to what? If I'm more experienced believer and more diligent, or not diligent, but I'm a trained priest, what should I be doing? Training other priests. See, Denise, you like that. It always comes back to disciple making. So the priesthood in itself, underlying tone is disciple making. So that's why Jesus said, go make disciples. So this is part of what we got to train people to do. This is part of the training of being a disciple. Is that and what all this is how do we deal with each other? How do we operate with each other? And the priesthood and the offerings give all that. And once I show you the pattern that's in Leviticus, you'll never be confused by Leviticus, the first 7 chapters, ever again. It'll make so much sense because it's right there in the pattern. What was that?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, that was somebody outside. Sorry. So we need to know who we are and how to fulfill our position. So here's some of the benefits. So why should we even care about this? It sounds really intricate and hard, and it sounds involved. So why should we even care? It brings health and focus to the body. Health and focus. It's part of our inheritance. All right? So the priesthood received their inheritance from God. God gave them his portion. So this is part of our inheritance. Because we as priests, spiritual priests, in the spiritual realm of God, how much land do we own? None. He didn't give us anything. He didn't give us anything that's tangible in this world. He gave us his portion, which was something spiritual, eternal, right? So the only provisions the only way that a priesthood survives is through performing the offerings, or performing or serving as a priest. If you don't survive, if you don't perform or act as a priest, you starve to death. All right. Now here's another passage to look at. Malachi 1, 6 through 13. Now this is really important, and I really need to read some of this just so, because some of the pictures that we're going to be painting is based in this passage. Let's see. Malachi chapter 1. We'll start in verse 6. It says, "The son honoreth his father, and a servant his master. If then I be a father, where is mine honor? And if I be a master, where is my fear? Saith the Lord of hosts unto you, O priests, that despise my name. And ye say, wherein have we despised thy name? And this is God's answer. You offer polluted bread upon my altar, and ye say, wherein have we polluted thee? In that ye say, the table of the Lord is contemptible." Okay, so he calls the altar, not an altar, a table. What do you do at a table? You eat. So just like there's 4 sides to the altar, 4 sides to a table, there's 4 groups. It's like you could strain out 5, but there's 4 groups that basically come to the table and eat of the offerings. All right, and who sits at the who sits at the table distinguishes who's it directed toward. All right, and we'll get into that. But it says, calls it a table of the Lord. And verse 8, it says, and if you offer blind for sacrifice, is that not evil? If you offer lame and sick, is that not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? And now I pray you, just beseech God that he will be gracious unto us. This hath been by your means. Will he regard your person, saith the Lord of hosts? So basically saying, listen, you're not being the right priest you should be. You're letting substandard offerings come to the altar and be sacrificed, and you're telling the people it's okay. And I'm not mad at the people because they're just doing what you let them do, but I'm mad at you, priests, because you're not doing your job, and you're telling people it's okay to bring substandard sacrifices to my altar. How are we doing on that point? As a body of believers, are we telling people it's okay to bring substandard?
What? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If that's okay. So, just as an example, in a
We lost you. I lost you again. You said just as an example, and we lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so to make it short, this person that's then starts talking about astrology and they're that's not a that's a, and then I would say okay, and let that just slide. Is that something that would be
You broke up there just a little bit, but you said somebody brings up astrology and says that's and says that they can find salvation through that. Is that what you said?
or that they're talking about their star sign, their astrological sign?
Yeah. Yeah. If they're saying if they're a believer and they're saying they believe in their sign and the stars and no, that is, it depends on your relationship with them.
Right, that's an unacceptable sacrifice though, right?
Yeah,
That would be a
that's no
tainted
sacrifice whatsoever.
Comparable, right?
Right. It's substandard. So anything you bring other than what God says is substandard. So, and that's not for me to set up. That's not for me. The only thing I can do is compare it to what God says. Okay? Not what I say, not what you say, not what we agree to. What does God say? And again, we're bound to the text. So that's where we have to be really careful. Right? That's why we need to be trained. That's why we need to be up to speed on what's what. That means we need to be diligent and study. So, does that answer the question?
on it that I even didn't comment about it.
What's that?
And I kind of let that slide, that whole conversation slide way. And then I was convicted after that I could have done it better.
Yeah, and once you understand your role as a priest, and you understand that it does involve relationship, then you will have discernment on how to approach that. I mean, again, we're not trying to beat anybody over the head. We're not trying to be a hammer. We're trying to assist. We're trying to help people to come in a right relationship with God. So this is not obviously we don't want to beat anybody up, but we do want to help people that are misinformed. So if somebody thinks that they can follow the stars and it's following God, no. Now, did God write his truth in the stars? Sure. But that's not something we worship. I hope
Right,
that-
and I had a response, but I just didn't do it, and I think it was because of the relationship that I have with this person
Gotcha.
that I didn't, but then I beat myself up a little bit afterwards, and I had to stop doing that.
Yeah.
So anyways, that was
Yeah. Yeah, I don't suggest beating each other up or beating yourself up.
right.
So you say just choose
So-
discernment.
Yeah, it is a but you're going to have, but just like, how do you get discernment? Yes, there's miraculous discernment that God gives you, but it's also, God takes you through situations of trial and error, where you learn, when you learn discernment.
Is it like loving people where they are? And
Yeah.
you kind of put something out, and if they take a nibble, they do. If they don't, they don't.
The question is, if somebody wants to worship God according to God's standard, we are not the makers of the rules. We're just the facilitators to express. Just like if somebody says, "Well, I think it's good enough." Well, it's not, but okay, whatever you say. I mean, I'm not agreeing with you, but I'm not here to police you. That's not what this is. This is serving one another. Do you remember when Jesus told the disciples, "Serve ye one another"? That always confused me, because I always thought and if we're going to serve one another, that means somebody has to be inactive, right?
Right.
Okay, but in the priesthood, they serve one another, but everybody's active. This is the only system that I know of where both are active but yet serving one another. So we as believers, see, there's going to be coming a time when I'm the one bringing a sacrifice and I need assistance, right, from a brother or sister.
Right.
But then there's going to be other times when they're bringing a sacrifice and I have to assist them. Just like Paul painted a picture of, I'm being an assistant at this point. But there's other spots that he writes where he was obviously getting assistance from somebody else. And the book of Romans, I believe, and this is just my opinion, it's only my opinion, I believe Paul wrote the book of Romans with the priesthood and the sacrificial system in mind, in the back of his head, and that's why every once in a while you see it pop up.
Question, we're talking about who's
Speak
giving,
up so she can hear.
Who's giving, who's receiving, who's
Yeah.
as far as service to one another.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm picking up what you're saying is that person's coming to you willingly.
Yes. Right.
You're not out beating people up.
Right.
Chasing them down.
And what she was saying is this isn't a chasing people thing. This is a voluntary action, and that is very, very true. Because the way the sacrifices happen, it kind of happens in a circle. So what you have is it starts in the throne room. It starts in the throne room of God. Goes to the heart of a worshiper that he wants to offer a sacrifice. He goes into his flock or whatever he has and picks out what he's going to offer. Right?
Right.
Up to this point, that's completely out of the priesthood's hands. He cannot make that happen, or she cannot make that happen. All right? That's completely on God's side and the offerer's side. Then they bring the offering to the tabernacle door. Right? Then the priesthood examines the offering. If it's acceptable, they sacrifice the offering, and the smoke rises back up to where it started, to God's throne. So it's a circle. See how that works? Does that make sense, Denise?
Step and process.
It's just a process. That's how it begins.
So
Mhm.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
So, how big of a role then does prayer play in all of this?
It comes into play. It's actually it's the daily duty of the priesthood. And we'll get into that. That's a very good question, though. All the stuff that we talk about as a believer or Christianity, I use that word loosely, Christianity, is contained in here, in the tabernacle. Okay?
Okay,
But what has happened, see, the priest does his daily duties not so he can be a good priest. He's doing those daily duties so he can be ready for somebody who comes to offer a sacrifice. So the daily duties become not the daily duties are not the point.
This is preparation.
It's preparation for the point. Is that vague
Okay.
enough?
yeah.
Doing this thing and doing the thing. And
I mean,
prepping, preparing.
I could kind of give you a preview. How far are we in? Okay, I can give you a preview of this. So here's what the daily duties of the priest are. He's supposed to make sure there's wood on the altar, right? That it be burning, always burning on the altar. They have water in the laver. Inside the holy place, there's the menorah, which is the lampstand, the table of showbread, and the altar of incense. So this is inside. Nobody sees what's going on inside. So like for a believer, if you don't pray, which is the altar of incense, nobody knows that. Okay? That's inside you. Because this is a 3-section area, just like you're a 3-section person. You have your outer body, which is this big outer court. That's where the sacrifice, so that's where the altar is. That's where the laver is. Everybody can see that. But prayer, which is the altar of incense, the menorah, which is light. Jesus said this to, I think it was in Luke. I need to get that passage. But in Luke, he says, if the light in you be darkness, how great is the darkness? Let's read that because it's very important. Let's see. There we go. It's in Matthew 6:23. Let's read that because it's really, really important to understand.
Matthew.
6:23. He's giving parables. Let's go back up to verse 19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasure upon the earth where moth and rust destroy. Uh-oh. I lost connection.
This is internet shows.
Yeah.
It's not.
You there, Denise? There, Denise? Hello? Yeah, we must have internet trouble.
Yes,
Yeah, sorry.
I can
Oh.
hear you.
Okay, good. We're back. All right, so in verse 19 of Matthew 6, it says, do not lay up for yourselves treasure upon the earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth or rust destroys, where the thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is clear, the whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, the whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? See, now that's crazy talk. How can light be darkness? That's confusing, isn't it? So what's he talking about? So he's saying, what is your guiding light? In other words, what guides you? How do you perceive things? What shines? What light do you use to interpret information? Well, menorah, that was the only light in here. Was Jesus talking about that? I have nothing definitive, but I believe he's referring to that. Because this is a picture of you. So what light are you following? Right? So is there oil in your lampstand? Is it lit? Are the wicks trimmed so that it burns brightly? Right? And what does it shine on? This table of showbread. Bread being truth. And there was a requirement of changing that bread out so much, ever so often, so to make sure it's fresh. So there has to be fresh study. There has to be fresh information. And then, of course, you had in here the presence of God, which is the Ark of the Covenant. So you are a triune being, just like this is a triune place. Outer body, soul, spirit. Right? And at the crucifixion of Christ, what happened? The veil was rent. This veil, not this one, this veil, which made the two compartments one. So now your soul, your mind, will, and emotions are now connected to your spirit. So it's a great picture of this. So this is you, but it's also God, Jesus. It's also a picture of heaven. So the lines begin to blur. So I'm telling you a lot in a short amount of time. I hope
It is a lot.
it's a lot.
I'm pushing all the scriptures for all these things.
So now you
Right.
have, so the daily duties are to make sure there's prayer, bread, and light going on in you. So that fits into what you were saying about prayer, Denise. How does that fit in? It just makes you ready for who's coming, right? How far are we going?
This is
Okay,
a lot.
I'm gonna.
This is a lot so far.
Yeah.
And we got scriptures to
Yeah.
chew on.
Yeah. So I know I've invoked a lot of questions. Is there anything poignant other than what you already asked? And I know Denise, you're struggling. She's struggling with internet.
Can we get all the affiliated verses we need to, like, study on?
Give it, chew on it, give
Okay,
it in the
so
in.
where should you go to read? Start reading in Leviticus. Okay? Start reading in Leviticus.
Leviticus 1:1, just read.
Start reading. Pay attention. I will tell you this. There's a pattern in the first 7 chapters.
100%.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's sectioned off. There's sections. Like you'll have one offering, it'll be sectioned off in so many sections. And once you see the sections, then you'll be able to unlock it a little bit better. As you can tell, this is such a big subject, it's hard to know where to jump in.
Trying to get your brain wrapped around. It's like you're aware of things, but then now you're trying to apply that and get applicable in the place where you're getting to where.
And I know I'm not going to be able to do it justice because whole books have been written about the tabernacle. A whole book has been written about just the clothes that the priests wear.
I will say,
So
I was one of those that
it's a big
you
subject.
get to through the Bible or something, you go to Leviticus, you go, keep going.
Yeah.
But now it's like when you see something, it's like it's so much more.
Yeah.
There's something there now for it to be applicable.
Yeah. Right.
Because well, nothing else, what I'm picking up here, just for reminder purposes, is that there's something in Leviticus that pertains to us
Yes.
now, and that you're saying that about all the sacrifices, and that's us, also what's in us, so try to look at that as we're
Right.
reading. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is everything in Leviticus is not history. And it wasn't just accomplished by Jesus on the cross. Was it accomplished on the cross by Jesus? Yes. Do we have to do sacrifices today? No. But we do them spiritually. Okay? And you can say, well, I don't want to participate in those. I would guarantee you've already done them. You just didn't know that's what you were doing. And you didn't have anybody to help you, or the person helping you didn't know what they were doing and helped you as best they could.
There's movement. That's a good thing. It takes time.
That's the thing. These things are happening. The question is, do you want them to happen haphazardly, or you want to have them happen on purpose? See?
Why do you do what you
Yes. Yes, very much so. So what we'll do next time, I'll go ahead and I'll quit showering you with information. I've already kind of jumped into the tabernacle, but I'll talk a little bit more about the tabernacle and the daily duties of the priest. Okay?
Okay,
So, if you want to study the tabernacle, that's in Exodus. Exodus 29 and 30.
do?
Yeah,
Exodus.
So-
29.
So the tabernacle is in Exodus.
I believe. Let me make sure 100%. And again, I'm not trying to make anybody believe anything. If somebody says, I don't believe anything you're saying, or this sounds too fantastic, then I would say, okay, don't pay no attention to me. So it actually starts in chapter 25 and goes through, and it starts with, and pay attention to how the tabernacle is put together by God's perspective. So a lot of times, if you just look at it the way God's presenting it, He'll show you the most important things that He thinks first off. Like the tabernacle, when He started giving Moses the tabernacle, guess what He starts with? Like if you were going to build a house, what would you start with?
Plans.
Plans.
Yeah, the foundation, how it's laid out, right? God doesn't do that. Guess what He starts with? Furniture. Would you start with the furniture if you're building a house?
What Joseph kind of furniture you want? You build the house around the furniture, okay?
That's what God did.
Okay.
He built the house around the furniture.
Some of these, like the RV, now that's relatable, but you kind of got, I gotta get the furniture in there,
Yeah.
so you gotta get the,
Yeah, it's-
you know, how are we gonna get all this kind
But
of stuff in there?
it's the mind of God that we're looking at.
What kind of furniture we
Right.
get?
Okay?
okay, huh.
Yeah. What'd you say, Denise?
I said, huh, I never thought of that before,
Yeah.
or
Well, and the
recognize
same
it.
thing with the offerings. When you read Leviticus, look at what God starts off with. What He starts off with is the most important. But it's not important to us, it's important to Him.
I guess like just our thinking, his thinking, we're not thinking, what's on his brain, what's he thinking?
Right.
What we're thinking is not
Well,
there.
how God thinks is completely different the way we think. And I love to hear people say, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And I'm like, and why does that matter? Right? I mean, I'm not trying to discount anybody's worth. I'm just saying, do you think God really waits on us to catch up with what He's saying or what He's thinking? No. No. So,
All right, so the tabernacle is Exodus 25 through
30, I believe. I think it goes to the end. No, not
Did
to
you
the
say
end.
29 and 30?
Exodus 25 through 30. Yeah. Because he talks about the tabernacle It's not the whole chapter, because in chapter 30 he starts talking about who may worship, the redeemed, the cleansed, the anointed. It's really interesting. I mean, if you start studying about the tabernacle and the priesthood, it's a big subject. If you just study just that, because the garments, the high priest garments themselves, are very intricate, and the materials they use. See, the materials they use it doesn't mean anything to us. Like if I said something was made of linen, would you go, ooh, it's linen? Does that impress you to make something be made of linen?
Process that has something to do with linen.
No.
So-
We have stuff that's made of linen all the time.
Right.
Right. Not that back
But
then. Linen was the garments of kings.
Yeah.
Only kings wore linen.
Well, the process of it is
It's interesting. Yeah. Everybody else wore wool.
What did you say about, so if the tabernacle is in Exodus 25 through 30,
Yeah.
Leviticus is?
Yeah. Leviticus is chapter. The basic offerings are chapters 1 through 6.
This is offerings,
Yeah. That's just the offerings.
chapters 1 through 6.
Yeah. And there's, in the first 3 chapters, there are 3 sections. In the last two and a half chapters is 4 sections each. I spent a lot of time in Leviticus. A lot of time in Leviticus.
Sounds like it's important.
It's very important.
I've heard, but I'm not hearing anything personally. It's just like
What?
I get the idea, like this is how much time you're putting into it. And I've
Mhm.
heard you teach.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's been years and stuff, but it's just like, to me, is this a lot? Just how much time put in.
Right.
Or is it just to go back and just start repeating it? It's just kind of like,
Yeah.
I grab my husband.
Yeah.
It's like,
Right.
what was this again? It's just like it's a lot
Right.
to take in.
And get comfortable with mistakes. Okay? Have you ever heard anybody say that? Get comfortable with a mistake as a believer?
We were breathing. First of all, mistakes are coming.
Because you're gonna make them. You're gonna make mistakes. So it's okay. The point is you're not on purpose making mistakes, which is not a mistake. Okay. Anything else, Denise?
No, that's quite enough.
I can feel it.
I agree, Denise.
I'm trying to relate back to first hearing
Well,
something.
maybe next time we get back together, we just review. Maybe we just review everything.
It's a lot.
Okay.
And this,
All right.
your verses.
All right. Thank you, Denise.